We
How
are
did that
on,
happen?
we are on 6 of 6. So we have been learning this already for 5 times. This is our 6th time, which is the final one of this unit, which we seemingly are going to continue. I'm not sure if you want to do it now or after Pesach, figuring your reality. But we are up to the 8th section. So if in 5 times we're up to the 8th section, that means we did 1 to sometimes 2 sections a class, which is exactly what happened. And we are just up to, as I said, the more avoidic, practical, if you will, section of this mimer. As you've already seen, it goes back and forth. It gives a more intellectual piece, then it makes a more strong application piece, right? We've had the back and forth because if we remember, the first ice was just very intellectual questions and answers. The second ice was also intellectual explanation. And the third ice was also intellectual. So we had like 3 ices, first, second, and third, developing this concept of Midian, the evil of Midian, the idea of the roots of ego, of baseless hatred, separation, dissension. And then in the 4th ice, the 4th section, we applied this practically, which took us like a whole session because when you want to make this practical, that's a real intense work. And then we went back, and in the 5th section, again, we started intellectually dissecting this idea of the antithesis of Midian being bittul, being chachma, being intellect. Godly intellect also seemingly divides. So we had to explain the difference, and we did, though, at incredible length in the 5th section, and the 6th section, and the 7th section. And now we're up to the 8th. And now they're up to the 8th section. We're going to go again, and I don't know how much we'll do today, but in the 8th, and in the 9th, and in the 10th, it's all work. It's all practical. It's very strong, if you will, musser almost, like rebuke, like look yourself in the mirror and understand what people, perhaps you, are doing. So we're up to the 8th section. So in the 8th section, what we were saying was, and this is of course piggybacking on what we did in the 7th, where we are describing how with a godly intellect, yes, there is a breakdown, there is crumbling things into its tiniest components, and then scattering all those things out on the table. But when we do so, it's not to divide, it's not to separate, it's not to cause gaps and like dissension between the pieces. It's rather to show the commonalities. It's to bring together. It's looking at things that are different than us and finding that really they're not so different, and really we can all bridge the gaps between and have a stronger whole from all of our seemingly separate parts, because within our separate parts there are pieces that are all the same. Remember I gave you the example of like Lincoln and his cabinet. If you're making a group, you're trying to organize something with other women that are similar to you or women that are different than you, and the strategies in both. So when we're on the side of godliness, we break down to create a greater strength, to create a greater whole, bigger than me with all my brilliant ideas and my best ideas and my smarter than everyone else ideas, but still only my ideas. When we're working together, it's a much stronger thing that emerges because it's all of our strengths fused. So with all that background, we say in the 8th section, but everything we're saying only works on the side of holiness, because on the side of holiness, the predicate, the foundation of everything on the side of holiness is bittul, is nullification. So when we're in a space of nullification, everything we discussed last week and the week before happens. But it only happens if we're in a space of nullification. But if we're not in a space of nullification and we're working together and trying to create some great big something, It's not going to happen because my ego and your ego is going to prevent us from blending and finding those commonalities and appreciating each other's strengths and using my vision with the addition of your vision, with the added new possibilities of your perspective, with the depth of your take. All of that happens if and only if there's bittul, there's nullification. Because without nullification, I can't see any of your ideas because I know mine is better. And if I listen to yours, I'm lessening mine, and mine's better. So why would I want to do that? So that's why this is very strongly predicated on bittul. Only works when the person is coming from a place of absolute bittul. Because when there's bittul, there's achdus. When I'm nullified, we can be one. When I'm batul, there's hiskalulus. When I'm nullified, all of our energies can fuse. But to get to that point of oneness, to get to that point of fusion, it's only possible through bittul. Only. So therefore, if I'm on the other side, the Sitra Achra side, the ego side, they can't do this. So if they had this great plot, how to do some nefarious scheme, and they're all plotting it together, well, only one person's idea is going to emerge, the one with the most clout. Because even if my idea might add a little something and your idea might add a little something, but on the side of evil, there is no nullification, even for us to create a better evil scheme, even for us to create a more evil scheme, it's not going to work. There's no openness, there's no receptivity to someone else's input. For that, you need bittul, you need space for others. So on the side of evil, it doesn't happen. There is no bittul, and therefore there's no unity, there's no fusion, there's no inclusion. It just doesn't happen. It just can't happen. There's absolute separation. Why? Because of the ego factor. And here it's very interesting because the Rebbe then connects it to the spheros, to the divine energies in the world of Tohu. Now, why do I find that interesting? Because as I told you when we first spoke about Tohu several times ago in this Hasidic discourse, in this mimer, Tohu is a realm of godliness. Tohu is not evil. Tohu is another, if you will, evolution in the godly energies until we come to our physical reality. And our physical reality is part of a chain of 4 spiritual worlds called the worlds of tikkun, rectification, which follow the worlds of Tohu, which is another spiritual reality. So as such, as a spiritual reality, it's sort of interesting to me that the Rebbe is referring to Tohu here as if it was a manifestation of Klippa, which it's not. It's godly energy. I mean, of course, you could say Klippa is also godly energy. Everything's godly energy, but I mean, it's overtly godly energy. But I guess its slant, its bent was akin to what would become in our world this expression of blockage of God, this expression of Klippa. Because in the world of Tohu, it says, there was a concept of like each, so to speak, giving to sort of make it anthropomorphic, each of the divine energies was saying, I'm ruling, I and no one else. So beneficent kindness is ruling, and there's no room for anything else. And strength is ruling, and there's no room for anything else. And that's why there was no blending. That's why there was no joint strength. And that's why they shattered. So this I'm ruling, of course, is the roots of what in a far more coarsened fashion is all of the ego of Klippa. Now you could say, but wait a minute, this is godliness. This isn't Klippa. So the Rebbe says, yes, this is godliness. Of course, we're talking about Tohu, we're talking about a world of godliness. But in this world of godliness, there was an emphasis on one godly energy, but not the other. What the Rebbe means by that is the basic dynamics of God, of our relationship to God, is referred to Kabbalistically as, and you've probably heard of this term before, we might have mentioned this in Mimer, I don't remember, Ratzu V'shuv. We did mention it at one point. Ratzu V'shuv. Ratzu is like the word rutz, to race, And shuv is like tshuva, shuv, to return. It's from a verse speaking about the angelic forces that are racing and returning, racing and returning. Think of that like pulsating energy, racing toward God and coming back down, racing toward God and coming back down. And that is the dynamics of all's existence in terms of God. Meaning we can think of it personally in terms of our souls. There's the ratzu, there's the desire to be one with God. We say that's the challenge of the absolutely righteous, of the tzaddik, where he doesn't want a separate existence. His only existence, he wants it to be part of God's existence. He's racing toward God. But then God says, I'm not interested in that. If you fulfill your desire, you know what's going to happen? We call it Kabbalistically close hanefesh. In our words, we'd say he died. Ratzu, the soul expires in its longing to be one with God, and it's no longer in a physical world. And God says, thanks a lot, but no thanks. That's not what I want from you. Ratzu, all that racing, all that movement to God is to give you the inspiration for shuv. Come back down to planet Earth. Come back down and serve me. Serve me inspired. Inspired by what? Inspired by the movement toward me. But you got to come back down and serve. So what you want, I'm putting this in very coarse terms because I want you to understand the direction the Rebbe is going in the Mimer with this concept. What you want is the race toward God, is the ecstasy, is the fusion, is the expiration of one's soul. And God says, and what I want is you to be on this world and serving me. So what's the function of the running toward God? To feel such a longing for him that you'll come back down to planet Earth and work really hard to deter mitzvahs, because that's the only way you'll get him. So the race is to empower the return. Any questions on that concept? Okay, now that is a godly movement. That is the movement of every soul. The more holy the soul, the more overt the movement. The more tuned you are into God, the more obvious that dynamics. That's a godly dynamics. It's a perpetual dynamics. It's the dynamics of our souls, of man, and of all celestial beings. Ratzu, racing toward God, vishuv, and the return back to what God wants of you. Now, if we would take that concept and slice it into two parts, which isn't really what you're supposed to do, because it's one whole organism, but if we would slice it into two parts, which part, this is the question, to see who's paying attention, which part represents the bittul, the ratzu or the shuv?
Shuv.
Great. Thank you. I got an answer and it's correct. The shuv. The ratzu is what I want. I want God. Now that's a very high I. That's a very sublime I. It's a very supernal I, but it's still an I. I want God. The wants might be in bigger letters than the I, but there is the I there that wants God. The shuv is what God wants from me. God wants from me to come back down and serve him. If we think of it in the dynamics of this world, it's literally coming back down. It's like my soul's racing, and God says, no, back down, planet Earth, mitzvahs, Torah, shuv. But this relates on all levels of creation, the movement toward God and the coming back down to God's service. The ratzu is almost like the expression of self, a very, very spiritual dimension of self. And the shuv is the nullification of self for God's will. So with all that background, you can understand what the Rebbe is saying here, that it's as if in the world of tohu, the emphasis was on the ratzu, not the shuv. Remember, I said the world of tohu is a spiritual dimension. The world of tohu is spiritual energy. It's not klipa. It's not an evil. It's only godly. But yet it's a godliness that's the roots of Yeshus. Because from the shards of tohu comes the energy of Midian. So it's pure godliness. But from this pure godliness is going to devolve into the separation of ego. So where do we see that in its roots if the roots is godliness? Because in a very subtle way, we're saying, even in this very godly dimension, there's a racing toward God, but not so much a focus on coming back down. to what God wants from you. Because in the world of theory, they would imagine God doesn't want them to smash. God doesn't want them to shatter. And if God doesn't want us to shatter, we better figure out a way of combining so we don't shatter. But they didn't figure out that way because their emphasis wasn't on sustenance. Their emphasis was on being one with God. And if I'm only thinking about one with God, I don't care about my own existence at all. And that's why we say it's the challenge of the tzaddik not to have what we call klois hanefesh, expiration of one's soul, when he's so wanting God that the soul leaves the body. Or the experience the Jews have by the giving of the Torah, where it says, with every divine utterance, their souls left them, and the angels need to restore them with the dew of the resurrection of the dead. So when you're in that space, you don't really care about your own sustenance, about making sure your existence perpetuates. But that's what God wants. If I'm thinking about the shuv, if I'm thinking about God's end of my existence, I should be focused on the joining to maintain our existence. I just want God. I'm focused on my powers, on my desire for a relationship with God. That's a very godly ratzu without any shuv, which leads to shattering, which leads on a much more coarsened form to ego, which leads to midyan. Clear? Any questions?
But you're not saying that ego is negative, are you? I mean,
Oh, of course I'm saying ego is negative. Yes.
I mean,
Yes. And this Myra, absolutely. Ego is the arch villain.
but how do you contribute if you don't have an ego? How do you contribute, to have coalescence and, everyone agreeing on being on the same page? You have to have your voice. You have to have
A voice doesn't mean ego. A voice isn't synonymous with ego. One could have a voice of nullification, but it's still a voice. The ego is like the Rebbe quoted with the worlds of Tohu, Ana Emloch. My voice is the dominant voice. My voice is actually the only voice. Or at least my voice is the only worthwhile listening to voice. That's the ego. But if we're in this, we have 12 of us here, over a million. And we are trying to do something together. And we each want to contribute, and we listen to each other's voices, and we try to put the pieces of beauty together and say, how from the 12 of us can we form the most beautiful vision, which takes each person's strength in a harmonious fashion? There's 12 voices that are going to be heard. Those aren't 12 egos at all. If they were egos, I wouldn't hear anybody's voice. I just hear my own. But I'm going to hear 12 voices in harmony. That's bittul. It's like if you would ever listen to, these concerts they have nowadays with like a bunch of big singers, but they're all singing together. Whatever. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So, of course, it's all prearranged, but we're watching the audience. It seems to us so spontaneous. Suddenly, Avram Fried is the real vocalist, and Benny Friedman is just like sort of harmonizing in the background. And then like it sort of morphs in the next paragraph. Ellie Marcus is the vocalist, and Avram Fried and Benny Friedman, and they're all the harmonizing voices. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. I'm using that as a mushal. Imagining that as a platform of bittul, where you have all these beautiful voices. But this is prearranged. This is a concert. Assumingly they're getting paid to do this. Assumingly they worked on in advance who gets which solo. But imagine almost more like a spontaneous expression of all these beautiful voices where like, now we want your voice to shine. And we're going to be the harmony for your voice. And now your voice we're spotlighting, your idea, your vision, and we're all going to be the harmony of your voice. And it's not that my voice can't be the main voice. It'll also get a turn. But I can just as easily slip into being the harmony of someone else's voice. Because it doesn't have to be my voice. It doesn't have to be your voice. It's the vision of what we're creating together. And we're all putting our egos aside so our voices are truly heard because there's no ego blocking.
Even if there's a better voice than others?
Yes, exactly. Even if there's a better voice than others, If I want the most beautiful vision, I want everyone's voice. That's like Hasidus explains the idea of beauty. And when Hasidus speaks of beauty, it's the idea of the variation. The variation of colors creates the beauty. So, but if, let's say one color is truly more beautiful, that's fine. Let's say gold is the most beautiful color. Gold's the most beautiful color, but gold will look better if it's gold with pinks, with blues, with greens. But that doesn't make sense. Gold's the most beautiful color. Why am I taking away the most beautiful color? Because gold will still look better if there's all these other variations. Again, going back to that mashal I just gave of the singers, I'm not a maven on singers at all, so I don't know which one has the best voice. But whatever, well, whatever. I'm old. We'll say Avram Fried. So let's say Avram Fried has the best voice. But the concert's going to sound better when there's times when I hear Avram Fried, and there's times I hear Benny Friedman, and there's times I hear Eli Marcus, and there's times I hear whoever. You know, the concert, the total is going to sound better if I don't hear Avram Fried the whole time, even though he has the better voice. Again, this is not a plug for him. I don't know who has the better voice. I'm just giving this as a mashal. Do you hear what I'm saying? The concert, the total will sound better if there's all these beautiful voices, even though one of them truly has a better voice. But it will still sound better if I don't only hear his voice the whole time.
But why, Cyril? You know what I mean?
Because that creates something bigger and richer and more dimensional than just the same one beautiful voice. It just does. And that's how Hasidus says that's what beauty is. And I think we can experientially attest to that. If you have somebody who has like a great speaker, they're the great speaker, okay? And there's whatever, a contest, color war. And you have this one girl who's a great speaker, and there's like 5 different speeches that have to be made over color war. And each time the same great speaker gets up and she makes a speech. Her speech is good. Her speech is better than anyone else in the school could make. But if I hear the same great speaker 5 times, after a while, it's like boring. I mean, like, yeah, I know she's a good speaker, whatever. So it's more interesting to me if I have different angles, if I have different voices, if I have different expressions. They might not be as good as this girl, but the difference is creating something bigger than that one person who is better than the others. That's the idea of Hachaltzu. That's exactly what Hasidus is saying. That's the most practical expression of this very Kabbalistic concept of the worlds of Tohu versus the worlds of Tikkun. In the worlds of Tohu, each dimension said, as we just read, or I gave over, Ana Emloch, I'm the ruler. There's nothing greater than Chesed. There's nothing greater than Gvura. There's nothing greater than Tiferes. That's the worlds of Tohu. And that's shattered. God says, no, that's not my vision. What's my vision? The world of Tikkun. What happens in the world of Tikkun? Chesed blends and melds and gives in a little. And Gevurah blends and melds and gives in a little. And Tiferes and Netzach and Hod and Yesod and Malchus. And now we have something more beautiful than any one of those pieces. Even though maybe one of them is the most beautiful. Maybe Chesed is the most beautiful. She probably is the most beautiful. But if I have all 7 together, it's more beautiful than that Chesed, which is the one supreme above those other. And that's the point of Bittul over Yeshus. So if I'm looking at something with eyes of Bittul in the most practical way to express it, this is very practical. I feel so grateful that I'm giving this class because I've been thinking about these concepts a lot. It's good. It's really practical just to think like, you know, I want to hear other people. I don't want this barrier of my own image, of my own voice, of my own better way of doing something. I want to be open and just hear other people and absorb their energy and not right away say, but mine's better. What do you mean mine's better? I have an advantage and she has an advantage and he has an advantage and they have an advantage. And what's really better when we could all piece it all together? That's a world of Mashiach. A world of Mashiach is where everyone's beauty is going to be shining and we're going to be receptive to all these beauties. Will they all be mirror images of us made in our image? No, not at all. But we'll be embracive of everyone's beauty. That's Mashiach energy. And that requires a lot of Bittul. Anyone else? Any other questions on this idea?
I'm wondering if that question is, Ima, are you settled with that answer, or is that still bothering you? I'm just.
Well,
It's a Vaida. It's a Vaida.
I'm getting there, you know, I'm okay with it. Yeah, I mean, I can I heard the gold mushel and how the pinks and the whatever. And I can also think of the mushel of a Farbrengen. If just one person talking every single time, it's not, you know, I don't care how good that person is. You want everyone to participate. It just makes just a great, much better energy.
That's right. That's a perfect example of a Farbrengen. Perfect. One person has the most brilliant things to say, but if all you hear is her voice after a while, like you heard her voice. And when you hear different voices, even if they're not as good,
right,
but they're adding and they're adding and they're adding and all the different colors and flavors, that's a great Farbrengen. Absolutely. Actually, the Rebbe is going to go into a Farbrengen, but I don't think we're going to get to it today. Sorry, what, Esther?
No, I was just wondering, like, so I'd better understand this. So let's say you have someone, because I was kind of hearing what my mother was saying, and let's say you have people that are, let's say, for bringing, let's say, like about chesed. So you can have some people, like one person's not so good at chesed, the other person's better. Are you saying that even the people that aren't, I'm trying to figure out how to say this, there's people that could not be so good at it, so it could feel like you're wasting your time listening to them, but maybe they're good at something else? Like, I'm trying to figure out how to articulate what I'm trying to say.
Let's say someone has a difficult time. Let's take away the word chesed, because hard knows something for and chesed. Let's say we're debating about mitzvayim, okay? And let's say one person, she's like the mitzvayim par excellence, and she's telling us all of her amazing stories and her funny stories and her inspirational stories, and we're all wowed. But we heard her for a long time. And then someone else adds her piece, and for this other person, it sounds really hard for her. And she shares her like difficulty and pulling herself together and what she tries to say that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work. And like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I relate to that better if that sort of feels more like me. And then maybe someone else says, you know, Messiah is really not my thing. And I'm really excited to hear about this. But when I focus on Iskashrus, I actually think about this instead, because I just sort of avoid the topic completely. Like, oh, yeah, all right. Well, if I'm not up to Messiah, that's actually a good option. So you don't have to be the best at it to have what to contribute that's very meaningful. And your weakness could inspire me as much as someone else's strength. And I don't only need to have examples of shining strength. I need each person's energy. I think your mother's example of Farbrengen was a perfect example of this concept. It's interesting that is exactly, well, sort of what the Rebbe goes into, we are not going to get to now, I see. In my fantasy dreams, I thought maybe, but I didn't think so, even my fantasy dreams. But in 2 Isius, the Rebbe speaks about the idea of, like, they're going to say it Farbrengen, but we will call it Farbrengen, of someone sharing their,
you can talk. I'm not
someone sharing their weaknesses with other people. And the Rebbe explains how beneficial that is. And then the Rebbe says, but that can only happen if you're in a space of bittul. Because if you're not in a space of bittul, you'd never be able to do that. So a real honest Farbrengen can only occur if all the people involved are really in a space of bittul. In other words, if I want to give my picture perfect presentation, my picture perfect how I want the world to look at me, and you want to give yours, and you want to give yours, it's not going to be a very authentic Farbrengen, and it's not going to be a very gripping one. Because we're just getting everyone's, you know, superficial.
So when you're saying Farbrengen, you mean like it sounds like you're saying a Farbrengen, not more like one person speaking, but like a lot of people talking back and forth, right?
And I'm saying I agree with your mother. To me, that's always the best Farbrengen, is when there's a lot of voices. Because we gain, that's the whole point. We gain from everyone's beauty. And from everyone's beauty together, something emerges better than from one person who's really beautiful. But if there's everyone's beauty, something bigger is going to come out.
Right. Sometimes that's how. Right. Sometimes that's how Farbrengens are. It's just one person talking. But I like also the mashal of, let's say a movie or a production. So there's like the main actor, but then you need the person who does the visuals and the person that does the props and the person that does the graphic. Like they might all see things differently, but together they create something beautiful. Is that?
That's also a good mashal for it, because that main actress or actor, however good and talented he or she is, he needs the support of someone that knows lighting, and of someone
Right.
that knows makeup, and of someone that knows set, and of someone that knows costumes, and of someone that has a script, and of someone that's a director, and someone that's a videographer, and so many people that are all together. So even though me, the observer, the viewer, sees him, but the him I'm seeing is being propped up by so many people's talents. So imagine
It's not-
a dysfunctional set where the actor is saying, don't direct me. I want to do what I want to do, and don't put that makeup on me. I want to do it, and I'm going to I need Emlo. I need Emlo, like me. I know the lighting, and I know the cassette, and I know the costumes. That I. He might be more talented than anyone, but it's going to look a lot better if we allow everyone's talents to contribute. I think that's the essence question you have, and that's the essence answer. Even if your talent is so supremely beyond everyone else's, the end product will be far more beautiful when everyone's talents, when everyone's voices are heard. And that's a far more godly experience. It's better in our physical world because it's truly a more spiritually richer experience. Any other questions on this?
Sorry, but when you're saying everyone's voice is heard, it doesn't mean that the makeup artist starts singing. You know, like everyone sort of.
Exactly. Each one is
Everyone has to heard
contributing
in the
their
right way.
voice, their beauty. So if your talent is a makeup actress, you don't want to be the singer. You want to be putting on the makeup.
How do you translate Hachaltzu?
Inclusion.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So this concept, yes, absolutely. This is the roots of the idea of Achdus, of unity. That's what I'm saying. It's very interesting because the concept of Tohu and Tikkun is Kabbalah. It's very Kabbalistic. It's theology. But when you look at this through the prism of Hasidic thought, it becomes so practical. It's such a practical work of like how we translate this movement into our own reality. Am I a Tohu, not meaning chaotic person, but am I a Tohu individual who knows my godly strength, and my godly strength is very great, and therefore can't receive anyone else's? Well, I know I know that story. I know what's written in the script. It shatters. What God wants from me is tikkun. Oh, hi. Thank you. Thank you for joining. So what God wants from me, tikkun means that's my best road. I know the script of tikkun. Tikkun works. And tikkun means, let me accept there are other roads besides my own. Let me accept there are other beauties besides my own. Mine is better. That's an irrelevant sentence. What's relevant is all of our beauties together create something strong and lasting and godly. That's the point. So it's theology, and it becomes very practical avodah, because we're saying tohu here in this theological perspective is the roots of the very practical reality of Midyan, of Yeshus. So that was the first part of the 8th section. And so we're saying Tohu started it off. Tohu is a godly reality with more emphasis on Ratzu than Shuv, on self than God. A godly self is still self. My way, the best way. And what leads to that is the shattering, because we don't have the strength of everyone's blending talents together, which comes down in our world to the ego, to the Midyan, which is expressed in our world and how we perhaps sometimes act toward others. Hopefully we don't, but perhaps we do. And the Rebbe says this Midyan expression, which isn't like some fourth that lived, in biblical times. The Rebbe's looking at it as something inside of me that's alive and well today, unfortunately, is the sense of me not being able to tolerate someone else. That someone else's space makes me uncomfortable. because their energy makes me feel like mine is being threatened, like mine is being lessened. Their existence makes me feel like I have less existence. And because I'm in that space where I'm so insecure in my own existence, that I feel their existence threatens my existence. So from that egocentricity, comes the baseless hatred. The hatred, honestly, because you exist, because your space makes my space feel less. There's nothing else you're doing, but that's enough. Are you plotting against me? No, but your existence plots against me. Your existence threatens me. That's Midian. And the Rebbe says that this is the Rebbe Rashab talking. So this was written 100 some years ago, and it's probably no different today, 100 plus years ago. The Rebbe says this we find in every community of the Jewish people. We find Midian. Again, they didn't vanish as an extinct tribe in biblical times when the Jews are entering Israel. They're alive. They live. They live in all of our egos. They live in all of the left sides of our hearts, within our animal energy. And the Rebbe says this very strongly. Because of our sins in all these most recent generations, in these last generations, in every place where the Jews live, the Rebbe says, there's always dissension. Imagine the pain that the Rebbe wrote this with. Imagine for a Rebbe, a lover of the Jewish people, to write this within a Hasidic discourse as godly words to be studied forever. There's always dissension. There's always a disagreement of opinion. And the Rebbe says for a very simple reason. Because if one says black, the other one has to say white. Not that they have a reason why they're saying white. The reason is very simple, because I have to disagree with you. So if you said black, I have to say white. Don't worry, if you said white, I would say black. Literally. The Rebbe is saying, and we see this in all communal matters, and we see this in matters of holiness. This Midian is creeping into all these holy enterprises. That it's just forcing, it's almost like this thing, if you're building, I want to destroy. Because I can't stand your energy. I feel it threatens mine. I want to be the macher. My idea is better. My vision is better. So whatever you're doing, I have to oppose it to make sure you don't gain power, because that's going to take away from my power. Now, this sounds like, I mean, come on, people can't really behave like this, right? But the Rebbe is saying, yeah, they do. Hopefully now they don't. But we have to look inside of ourselves. Do we find it in ourselves? It's very, very, I mean, the Rebbe says this really, 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 really strongly. And the Rebbe says there's nothing intellectual, there's nothing rational going on here. It's a very simple principle. Whatever you say, I'm going to say the opposite. Okay, so we got a term for it today. It's just what we got to do. Whatever I'm going to be the polar opposite. You're building, I want to destroy. Don't worry, if I'm building, you're going to want to destroy it. If I have a great idea, you're going to knock it. If you have a great idea, I'm going to knock it. So what happens to the product? That's why the evil inclination invests so much in this Midian energy. It's such a good investment. Because when the Midian energy is really strong, and it can creep into the most godly places, the very, like we say, Zaydina Kapata, with a very godly look, it creates destruction where there should be building. I mean, like, I'm thinking this isn't exactly the same thing, but the Rebbe says in the end, what gets lost is what needs to be done, what we're trying to accomplish. That's the karma, but nobody looks at that. People aren't thinking, oh, but this orphanage was supposed to be built or was supposed to be funded, or this kollel could have happened, or this Stucca campaign, these people could have had money for Pesach, or we could have gotten new ambulances for our Hachaltzu. No, people just think, oh, good, I'm glad what he wanted didn't happen, because if it happened, that would like bring him up, which would bring me down. So better I made sure it didn't happen. And he also made sure what I want didn't happen. So in the end, nothing happened. Yay, I won because he didn't grow. No, I lost. Because what happened to the Hachaltzu? What happened to the Hachaltzu ambulances? What happened to the Kollel? What happened to the orphanage? Well, all of those were korbanos for my ego. That's what the Rebbe is saying here. Now, obviously, the Rebbe is speaking from deep pain. You can only imagine the events that were happening that inspired this mimer, but obviously it's a mimer, it's a timeless lesson. So for each one of us to really think in terms of ourselves, oh, I don't really behave like that, right? Well, I hope not. I hope none of us do. But obviously maybe in a more subtle fashion, we do sometimes. And that's really the piece to think about. Like, where in myself am I so guarding my own kavod, my own space, my own great ideas, that I'd rather that remain intact and the goal not happen, because I care more about me than the goal. That was, in brief, the 8th section. The 9th section. So in the 8th section, the Rebbe took this concept and applied it to communal work. Like on the level of communal work, each person there's so much infighting, there's so much each person knocking the other person down, that the communal objectives, the godly objectives, are not being met because every person is just guarding their honor and trampling on everyone else's. And the Rebbe says this happens again and again and again. This also is true, of course, as we're going to say in the 9th section, interpersonally. It doesn't only have to be if you're worrying about, helping the community and Hachaltzu and, Hachaltzu ambulances and kollels and orphanages. It could happen interpersonally the same way. If you're just looking at each person, as we would say, with a bad eye. And instead of looking at each person, this would be the bittul, if you want to know practical. The bittul eye set of eyes is looking at each person and seeing how beautiful they are. They're so special I remember once in our shul, it was like Simchas Torah, I think. So probably whoever was doing it was maybe a little, not drunk, but a little happy. And he was going around each person in the shul. And he was saying how each person contributes to the shul. It's a small shul. And everything he said was true. And I remember I was there, and I, of course, was free of any intoxicating liquid. So my brain was very clear. And I was thinking like, wow, you're so right. And it's such a different way of looking at it, because normally, in a shul, especially a small shul, you're like, oh, this person doesn't do this, and this person doesn't do this, and this person doesn't do this. And you can see what everyone doesn't do that hurts the community. And the bittul set of eyes is what each person does that contributes. Looking at each person and seeing and accentuating their beauty. Both are true. You got a right eye and you got a left eye. But when you're looking with bittul, you look at the other person and you see and appreciate their beauty. And when you're looking with ego, you look at another person and all you see is their negative. And of course, you accentuate the negative. That takes up the whole space, whatever that negative flaw is, that's all you see. And you discard all their good. All their good becomes meaningless because of this negative trait you see in them. Because again, you want to have an excuse to dismiss them. You want to have an excuse to maintain your own superior place in yourself. And therefore everyone else has to be dismissed as insignificant, as inferior. How can I say everyone's inferior? Some people have nice qualities I don't have. So I have to find in each person a problem, and I have to so accentuate the problem, so that problem obstructs me from seeing anything but them as a problem. So they're inferior, so I can dismiss them and I can stay superior. Even in my own little mind of what's going on, I can still look at me as superior because this person's possible for this, and this person's possible for this, and this person's possible for this. And in this fashion, I can knock away every person, so I remain, the only angelic, significant, superior being around. So again, the bittul eyes is to see the beauty, is to see the good. And the ego eyes is to see the bad, and that bad is so overwhelming, like, with your finger, you block the sun. That's all I see is the negative.
Can I ask a question? Is there a way to see the negative in a way of bittul? Because sometimes if you kind of ignore and pretend negative doesn't exist, that's not so emistic either. Like,
Yeah,
let's say,
you can see the negative in a way of bittul if you're seeing it like a surgeon, without any coloration, without any emotional overtones, just in terms of the practical, what must be done about it.
not
That's
even like you're saying, no emotional overtones. Like you can see that that's like, okay, they have a hard time with X, Y, and Z. So like sometimes like if you, like it's, let's say if you're running an organization or something and you realize a person has like a chisaron in something, it's not like you're angry at them about it. You're just acknowledging that that's not their strength or something. So if, like you said, no emotional overtone, but like empathy would be an okay emotional overtone.
That's I don't mean by that. What I mean by emotional overtones is like if I see a problem in a person and it gets me really upset, there's my ego involved.
Right.
If I see a problem in a person and it's such a huge problem and I'm like so reacting to the problem, that's my ego involved. If I see something with an eye of what needs to be done about it, then I mean, in my head, I view it like the surgeon. You don't want the surgeon to be emotional. You don't want the knife to shake.
Right.
You want the surgeon to be very, very dispassionate, see what needs to be done, and cut with a lot of calmness, without getting emotionally affected by what he's seeing. So when you get emotionally affected, then your ego is wrapped into the situation. If it's dispassionate, then it's just what has to be done.
Unless you just have Rahmanas on, and that also works.
Well, Rahmanas helps you have that dispassionate perspective. Yeah, Rahmanas is what Esther said, the empathy. The empathy is fine. That's not a negative. That's not a problem. But if you're overwhelmed by how horrible the situation is, or what a bad person they are, or how disgusting it is that they can behave like this, then you lost it. Then you're wrapped into the problem, and then you can't really help them because you're part of it. But if you can see it like as an objective thing, it's like, I think of it sometimes as the difference between educating your children and educating your students.
Right.
Educating your students is dispassionate. They're not your kids. What they do hopefully doesn't twist your guts the same way. So therefore, you can do a much better job. You know what you have to do and you do it. But when your kids do the same thing, it gets you inside of yourself. This is your child behaving this way. In other words, it's an assault on your own ego. And you're so emotionally wrapped up with what's happening, then you can't see it clearly and you can't respond clearly. So you know what to do, because when your student does the same thing, you're great at it. But when your child does it, you're not so great because you lost it. What did you lose? You lost your objectivity. You became too emotionally wrapped up, and that's why you can't handle it as well. So there's a certain advantage in treating your children like your students, just seeing the issue instead of getting wrapped up in it. And that's where the ego comes in. So the Rebbe brings this pasuk, Achechem son echem, your brothers, your enemies, and the Rebbe brings out here what, obviously taking a little bit of context here, Achechem, the ach, a brother is like the word achva, chibur, fusion. So here you have achechem, you have this situation where there should be all this fusion, but instead of having the fusion, sonechem, you fracture the whole thing because you don't want this other person to have so much space. You want to have the space. You don't want to have this level of unity. You don't want to be part of something bigger than you, and therefore it becomes sonechem. It becomes this level of hatred. And the Rebbe said, if you really were where you're supposed to be, here's like a little litmus test, the Rebbe says. You would feel such joy in all the good that's happening to them, and you would feel such pain in everything hard that they're going through. But if when someone else's joy doesn't make you so happy, like you're sort of happy, but you sort of wish maybe like it should happen to you instead also. And when they're going through pain, it doesn't hurt you. I mean, of course it's bad, but like it doesn't really bother you. And the Rebbe says, then it's you lost it. Because if you were really in this space, if you rip the midyan out of the left side of your heart, then someone else's joy would give you so much joy. And someone else's pain, the Rebbe says, would give you more pain than your own pain. Why would it give you more pain than your own pain? Because the Rebbe says, if you're going through something hard, chas v'shalom, none of us should go through something hard. But if you're going through something hard, then you know what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to look into your deeds, analyze yourself, assume you did something wrong, assume God is doing this in his kind, beneficent way to help you grow, to help you correct yourself. So even though you're going through something painful, but you can still look at it as God in his kindness helping you get over what you need to get over in yourself. But when you're looking at someone else's pain, you don't say, oh, well, God is probably doing it, so they should learn this and this about themselves, so they should become a better person. No, you just feel their pain. You're not supposed to philosophize away someone else's pain. You're only supposed to philosophize away your own pain. So with my own pain, I'm supposed to be philosophical, which means it's not supposed to hurt as much because I understand it's coming from God. It's for my good. It is good. I can even understand what I need to grow. I can understand what I need to repent. I know what I've done wrong more than anyone else. So I use it as a catalyst for growth. So it hurts, but I understand the growth. I understand the need. But when I'm looking at someone else's pain, it's just pain. I'm not supposed to be philosophical about someone else's pain. I'm not supposed to understand it as a springboard for their growth. I'm just supposed to feel the pain. So the Rebbe said a person who's really in this out of Midian land space, someone else's joy is going to be his joy, and someone else's pain is going to hurt a lot more than his own pain hurts. That's us in Bittul. That's us when we really feel other people. That's us when we're where we are supposed to be. But if Midian took over us, if we became an extension of Midian, then someone else's joy makes me not so happy because I'm not getting it. Why is he getting it? Is he better than me? I don't. And someone else's pain. I mean, I'm not like happy he's suffering, but whatever, everybody suffers. Because I'm so wrapped up in myself, the fact that he's suffering doesn't really bother me too much. And that's me with a lot of Midian. And that's the difference in the person. Now, let's say you say, but no, I know this other person, and I could even sort of think why God is doing it to him. I know what he's doing wrong. And I really think that's why this is happening to him. Could I be in a space of bittul and feel that? Is that possible? What do you think?
Yeah, if you try to daven for them, maybe. I mean, you try to change things. If there's a way for you to change things, you think of ways to maybe.
You're saying it would depend on your reaction afterwards to see if you were sincere or not. That makes sense. Anyone else? Any other ideas?
Also, how can you say, well, I think I understand what's happening to him? You're not God. You're not understanding what the Eibishter wants. You're not understand, and you would not be able to either, because as much as you sympathize with him and you're sad that he's sad, but you don't understand what's really going on behind the scenes. And if you do, that's gaiva, or that's the opposite of bittul. That's midian. That's saying, oh, I understand because I know everything that's going on in the world, but you don't. You can't.
So you have
So
a really good point, Toby. If we think we know the problem, we already slipped into Midian.
that's right. That's right. That's what I'm saying.
I get it. I hear what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. Oh, I understand exactly. That's already a piece of Midian.
Right.
Who are you to understand exactly anything in anyone else's life?
That's right. You can't. You only know what you see, and that's not everything. It can't be.
So
Anyone
is
else thoughts on
judgmental the
this?
same? Is judgmental the same as Midian?
Well, judgmental would be an expression of Midian. It's one of the colors and flavors of Midian, because judgmental is the ego, which is what Toby's saying. And I hear what she's saying. I get it.
And that's the first word that came to mind, was judgmental. But,
Right, because you're
When
saying
you
someone who's
describe-
saying, oh, I know why you're suffering this way is very judgmental.
right.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there are some things that we know why they have, like, if someone doesn't take MISER, so, if they're, all these expenses are coming up and their house doesn't sell, like, there was someone that I just saw, I knew they weren't taking MISER, I just like, think about. And they, like the house that they had inherited sold for like a third, like all these things kept coming up. They ended up with nothing, not nothing, but almost nothing, just a lot less than they should have. I mean, they say MISER, if you don't take MISER, then you get 1/10 and Hashem gets the other 9/10. Yeah, I mean, it's not, I mean, it's just my.
So I think what Judith is saying is, but sometimes we could sort of have a feeling, not as Toby's saying that we're God and we know for sure, but maybe we could have a sense of maybe why this person's suffering, though we could be wrong. And I think what Elka's using, the word judgmental, is a good word. If I'm the know-it-all, I think that was a term of Toby, if I know everything and I know exactly why you're suffering, that already sounds very Midian-like. But I think looking at what Judith is saying and putting it within the Bittul perspective, there is, as the Rebbe Rashab is saying, there's room. In other words, he's saying like this: if another person is in joy, your joy should be as intense as another person's joy. No barriers. If another person is suffering, your pain should be as intense, and even more intense than if you were suffering, because for your own suffering, you can understand why, but not for someone else's. But then he adds, and if maybe you do have an inkling why, if you're coming from a place of bittul, you could tell it to the other person. You would find the way to say it that they could hear it. But a lot of times, I see this with people, that when one person tries to convey something to someone else, what they can convey is 100% true. 100% true. It doesn't only have to be a person's flaws, I mean, anything. But if they're saying it from a place of ego, coming from my absolute knowledge of everything, the other person can't hear it, because all they hear is the ego.
What about if you have a friend, or I don't know, a close acquaintance or something, that they talk to you about certain things, and they're very back and forth on stuff, and you really do feel their pain, and it's gets to the point where you just get in bad moods every time you talk to them, because they really bring you down with their negativity. What do you do then? Because that's also not good for you.
Probably need to do is protect yourself from conversations, because you're not able to absorb it in a good way. Meaning you have this, as we're calling it, this godly advantage, that you're really feeling their pain. But unlike how the Rebbe is explaining it, that you feel their pain and you hold it, it's more like you feel their pain and it's pulling you down. You're not holding it, you're being pulled down by it. So if you know someone whose pain is pulling you down, you need to find ways to protect yourself, which could be don't talk to them as often, or don't allow yourself to really go to where they're at, because it's not good for your holding right now. It could be completely your own weakness. It's not their fault, perhaps. Or it could be their style and color of pain is just echoes too much pieces of yourself, and therefore you can't handle that pain. But you have to honor and respect that in yourself, and know that it's not them. I'm the issue. It's not them. I mean, they're going through what they're going through in life, but I'm not ready yet to be able to handle that pain. So I have to, give them some guarded space, and know that there'll come a time when I can give more, but right now I can't. I just want to finish on this point, which we sort of briefly did, the 8th and 9th section, pretty good for us. So if you sort of could feel let's say you're just giving a very simple example. She's saying, I have a friend, and we're creating a mythical situation here. I have a friend who doesn't give tzedakah and who's losing a lot of money or has a lot of financial difficulties. I know they don't give tzedakah. So they're going through pain. They have a lot of financial difficulties, and I feel their pain. And it's a lot of pain. But I really feel if they gave stucco, probably they'd be much better off. You can tell them that. If you're coming from bittul, you can say it and it could be heard. If you're coming from ego, that's what I think Toby was referring to. You know, when the people come and they know all the answers and they totally understand your situation, they've got it all mapped out. They have this like little secret line between them and God. So they're the purveyors of all knowledge. And you feel like, yeah, you're just coming to show that you're better than me, smarter than me, no more than me. Like, I can't even hear what you're saying. But if the person is coming like in Yudit's example, not as like, I know God's inner secrets, but like, you know, I've seen this in my own life, how it works. I've seen this when I don't give stucco, how I end up losing out financially. I know this is what Torah says. I feel so bad for everything you're going through financially. I think if you really force yourself to give, even though I know I don't have anything, you'd see God will make it work. He'll turn the whole thing around. Then you can say it. So the point that Rashab is ending here, which is similar in a sense to what Esther was asking before, when you're looking with bittul, it doesn't mean that you only see perfection in the other person. The point is you don't have the ego in yourself. And that's all the difference.
Does it make a difference where that other person is holding? Like if they get defensive by what you say.
In terms of their receptivity to your message, or in terms of the general?
Yes, no.
Yeah, if you feel a person can't hear what you're going to say, then you shouldn't say it, because it'll only increase their pain.
I mean, so make it defensive, or
yeah, they might feel bad. You might make them feel worse. Your goal isn't to make them feel worse. If you know they can't hear you, if you know they're not going to hear you, and they're just going to feel worse, then there's no point in saying it. We're told that in general, in terms of before one gives rebuke to someone, you have to sort of evaluate, can they hear it? Because if they can't hear it, there's no point to me saying it. I'm not saying it for me to put a check on my chart that I was a good person and gave them Musar. I'm saying this to help them. If these words aren't going to help them, they could just harm them. They could just give them more pain, and then they're wrong words. So yeah, you do need to take into account how the other person is, where they're holding. But again, I think if a person speaks from a sincere place of love and bittul, a lot of times people can hear it. A lot of times what blocks us from hearing other people is the ego in the other person, which is what I feel, instead of the perhaps very real message the other person's trying to give me. I mean, the other person, what could they be saying to me 100%, but I can't hear it because what I'm hearing is the ego.
Right.
And maybe you're not 100%, you know, you're striving, you're like good 72%. But if you're coming from a place of bittul, whatever you're giving them, they'll be able to accept.
If they're not accepting, it's probably you need to still refine your bittul a little in the message.
That's what we would try to do.
It reminds me of the story of Reb Ari in his book. I think there was a thief in a house or something. He came into a room and he saw someone stealing, and he told him, "You probably forgot what it says in like Shulchan Aruch or something about." Like so sincere, and then the guy I think just left. Like he realized he.
Right.
Reminds me.
Like Levi Yitzchak and Berditchev stories like that, right? Right. Because guess what? They really mean it. They really mean it, and that's why the other person hears it. Exactly. Oh my gosh, it is late. All right. So this was the conclusion of our 6th wonderful session together, finishing off the 9th section of this rather lengthy discourse that hopefully was practical. Hopefully I'm not the only one hearing what we're saying and trying to work on it, because it's great work, hopefully for every single one of us. And Mirz Hashem, I guess we'll Yudit and everyone else involved will figure out when we want to continue. But for now, this was very wonderful. And if we don't meet again before Pesach, we should use this as wonderful cleaning tools as we clean the outside. We got great, I don't know how you're outside. We got great tools to work on the inside. Great Pesach cleaning tools, all right now lined up at our disposal. So it should be wonderful cleansing work for all of us. And we should be doing this only in good, only in godly, and ultimately in the Geula. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a wonderful,
That was great.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
so much.
So inspiring.